Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the worldwide phenomenon of inventing massacres of black or brown people by white people. Now, there's a worldwide, it's obviously globalist funded and globalist inspired, but there's a worldwide move in Australia and Britain, United States to invent all these terrible things that straight white males are supposed to do, white supremacists, Nazis, fascists, and they are just pure inventions. They come cranked out of the propaganda machine. Now, the problem is the people that are doing it, like the depiction of Kyle Rittenhouse, the people that are doing this propaganda know that it's lies. They know that it's lies, but to them, they're pursuing an ideology. They're pursuing an ideology, and so any lie, any untruth, no matter how grotesque, is fully acceptable in the service of this ideology. So they don't even think they're doing anything wrong. We're telling these terrible lies, inventing these untruths, but it's in a good cause. Yeah, sure it is. Now, you've probably noticed in England that because there hasn't really been a black population in England for until really the 1950s, I suppose it started. You might get the odd one or two. So there's just a handful of black people in the entire history of England that were there, or Britain that were there. So they had to invent stories about them. Now, there's a historian or an alleged historian in England and he's a black guy called David Olusoga, and he's constantly employed to push the anti-white blacks as victims propaganda. And one of his favourites is that a black man was lynched in Liverpool, England, in the I think it was the early 1900s, and but the reality was that this guy wasn't lynched by a mob or anything like that at all. He shot a police officer after getting involved in a brawl, and then he tried to run off and was chased, and he was trying to get back to a ship that he would come in on. He was a sailor, as I understand it, and somehow he ended up in the water. He couldn't swim at the docks, and he's trying to get away from the police, and that. So he wasn't lynched. Nothing like it. He was a criminal that had shot a police officer after he brawled with some Swedish, I think it was Swedish or Norwegian sailors, arguing over alcohol. So it was hardly a race-related issue, and so that's being pushed as a black guy being lynched by these wicked, evil white people. Oh, wah. Now the same thing's happening as it happens in the United States, Canada, Australia. It's an international, organised, centrally sort of scripted, directed, funded by the globalists. Or your tax dollars, or both. And a lot of NGO activists also pushing this one as well. But in Australia, the view is that, or the propaganda is that there were many massacres of the Indigenous black people here by whites, and it just went unreported because of white supremacy or racism or something like that. They're not really very clear. So alleged scholars, they're not scholars are assholes, these people, seriously, but they're being given generous amounts of money to go and run around and fantasize in their ideology, and let the insane vapors of the mind just invent some incident. So they'll go through records of the day, and they'll cherry pick them carefully. They'll also assign meaning to certain words when the words back in those days meant something else. And for example, say there's a word relocate. Relocate the natives to the next point, or the next valley across, or something like that. Then these activist so-called historians will, for example, say that relocate is really meant kill back in the day. That was the sort of euphemism for kill, when it never was. That's just an outright lie. So through this invention of what a word might mean, they can say, well, that meant kill. So 80 Indigenous Aborigines were killed by these terrible, evil white men. So it was a massacre, and they'll give it a name, and they'll even erect a plaque in the place where this alleged massacre took place. I mean, it didn't. No such thing occurred. There was never any men. Nobody died. And then they'll erect a plaque there, and then the education department will put that plaque on as a school excursion thing. So children are taken to this to read the plaque. This is where, wicked, evil colonial white men killed these helpless, defenseless, black people, and that's this shows how evil white people are. And of course, the school children are going to be, that area at least, they're going to be 90% white. So it's just shaming and blaming people for doing something that never happened. Is also trying to transfer guilt across generations. That massacre they're alleging happened in 1807. So it's not like it was recent. It's over 200 years ago. So I don't know why they're trying to guilt trip 10-year-old children on an event that they allege that didn't happen, but they allege happened over 200 years ago. It's insane why the Department of Education would go along with this sort of outrageous propaganda and then pushing it at children is quite beyond me. But as you go through the literature, is now a lot of it, breathlessly reported by the left-wing media outlets like The Guardian and that sort of thing. They love this sort of stuff. No one bothers to check the facts. No one even tries. Nobody wants to. It's a narrative, and they're pushing the same sort of narrative control they used against Kyle Rittenhouse, and they do this sort of thing. It's the same playbook, time and time again. And we need to be awake to it and push back against it. But I went through these, and there's quite a rigorous scholar in Australia went through these things and actually sourced the original records, and he's corrected all the claims that are made by these alleged bullshit propaganda historians, and some of it's just absolute howlers of lies, absolute howlers. It's not even close. They're not even trying to sort of have a kernel of truth in it. They're just outright lies and inventions. So yeah, and in one case, there's some white guys are fishing, and they put a bit of a stash of fish on the shore, and some indigenous Aboriginals came over and started helping themselves to the fish, and the white guys fired some shots, in the air to scare them off. It didn't work, and then one of the Aborigines tried to run off with the fish, and they shot him. Now, was that a massacre? Of course not. Was it? Is it desirable that somebody gets shot? Well, not obviously. No one needs to die over those sorts of things. The guy was warned, and there were shots fired, as other witnesses have attested. But anyway, it ended up that one of those people died. But if you think about the circumstances, again, this is over 200 years ago. The circumstances, the nearest sheriff's office or law office, if you like, police station, was 100, close to 200 kilometres away. You couldn't travel it by road, not then. So you had to wait for the boat to come by. And that came by once a month, and so on. So it could have to deal with it legally. It could have taken a couple of months by all the toing and froing, assuming the police officer who was in the nearest sort of town was prepared to come over and adjudicate on it. So probably not. But so I don't know what else people can do in those sort of Wild West situations. What some people today think, well, why didn't he just why didn't he just get out his mobile phone and call the local police station? I mean, gee whiz, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with calling law enforcement? No, that's not how it was in those days. This is a wilderness. There's no one around. There's no police anywhere, and this sort of thing. So no, that's not an option back in the day, and even up until the 1870s, 1880s, in some of the newer territories of the United States. There was a lawlessness there and there was a federal marshal that would come by every now and again. Even Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War U.S. president, he was like a bush lawyer going around on a circuit to towns, and he would represent people in these these towns and these villages as part of his I don't know what you call it, road trip around a certain circuit. I think it was in Southern Virginia and around there. But and it was a long trek. The roads were, they couldn't use rivers all the time, so the roads were very poor, and they had to take a long time travelling in between towns and villages. So this idea that justice was on tap at the flick of a switch back in those days, it just wasn't so. So these are the things. Now, what also isn't reported is the amount of white settlers that were killed by the blacks, as they were called. And there's not a whole lot of difference, actually. Like 34 white people get killed by the blacks. White people retaliate, kill 47 black people, but the numbers are comparable. So it's not as if there's a huge massacre, nobody white dies, and all the black people die like flies. It just wasn't that way. It never was that way. So this idea of massacres is just complete and utter nonsense. But it's something that the globalists really want to make up. They really want this narrative because it divides people on racial lines. It guilt trips white people, which softens white people up. It makes them easier to control. See, you damn fascist Nazi white person, we're taking away your rights because you don't deserve rights, because you're so evil. So there. And that sort of, it infantilizes white people, but also softens them up. So, well, maybe I don't deserve any rights because my great grandfather did something bad once. Maybe that's that is nonsense, and the globalists know it's nonsense. It's just a narrative they're using to try and crush white people and crush white people's will to resist the globalist project. Which, as we all know, is taking away the rights of white people and reducing their standard of living immeasurably. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.